Following allegations of UNRWA employees participating in October 7th massacre, several countries decided to freeze the organization funds. Will more countries follow? How could this impact UNRWA's activity and legitimacy? And what should Israel do in light of these disconcerting findings? Dr. Adi Schwartz from the Misgav Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategy will discuss these questions and more. He is a specialist in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, a research fellow at the Ben-Gurion Research Institute for the Study of Israel and Zionism, and the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. He co-authored with Dr. Einat Wilf, The War of Return, How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obscured the Path to Peace. Dr. Schwartz will speak, and then afterwards we're going to open up for Q&A. Thank you so much. Please begin.
Thank you very much for Media Central for hosting me. Since we're dealing here with something in the news cycle, I imagine that most of you are quite up to date with what's going on. The latest news I've seen is that Sweden joined the long list of countries which have decided to temporarily cease funding for UNRWA. What I will try to do is a few remarks, and then we'll open it to your questions. I think this step of stopping the financing of UNRWA was long overdue. Should have happened many years ago. It's a step in the right direction. I think that if I was asked, what should Israel do and what should the international community do, I would certainly say that this temporary step should be made permanent. UNRWA should be dismantled. I think that UNRWA is perhaps one, if not the most, but certainly one of the worst organizations that had the worst impact on the unfolding of the Arab-Israeli and specifically Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It has made the Palestinian refugee problem, it perpetuated the Palestinian refugee problem instead of solving it, instead of resettling refugees. And to make things a bit clear, just to remind you that when UNRWA was created at the wake of the 1948 war, it was supposed to resettle the refugees. That was the idea. It was an agency for the resettlement of refugees. Originally, it was a temporary agency for 18 months. So it should have stopped operations, ceased operations in 1951. We're now in 2024. And not only that the Palestinian refugee problem was not solved, not even one refugee was even resettled. And if you compare this refugeehood, this refugee situation to other refugee cases from that period, namely India, Pakistan, or what happened in Europe, Germans, millions of Germans and Ukrainians and Polacks and Czechs, etc., who had to flee and became refugees, none of them are refugees today. So what we are seeing is not an agency which works for humanitarian issues, but an agency which is serving a political purpose, which is to undo the state of Israel. Now, the main tool that this is being made possible is the definition of refugee. UNRWA has a definition of refugee which inflates the number of the Palestinian refugees at least more than 20 times. The real number, if we had applied international standards to the case of the Palestinian refugees, there would be perhaps 200,000 refugees. Let me just make it clear. There are some 2.2 million refugees, registered refugees by UNRWA in the Gaza Strip. Sorry, out of 2.2 million of population, the entire population of the Gaza Strip is 2.2. Out of them, some 1.5 million are considered refugees. That's something like 75%. Now, let us think about it for a while. The main criteria all over the world for a refugee to be called a refugee is that he is outside of his country, right? There's no sense of telling someone or designating someone as a refugee if he's not out of his country. Now, regarding Palestinians who currently live in Gaza or in Khan Yunis or in Deir el-Balah, and for that matter, they have lived there for the last 75 years at least. They are Palestinian. They live in Palestinian cities. They certainly consider the Gaza Strip to be Palestinian and part of Palestine. So at the same time, they live in Palestine, right? They live in Gaza, and they consider themselves, and the international community consider them to be refugees from Palestine. Now, this is unprecedented. This is the only place on earth where a man or a woman can be both living in Palestine and being a refugee from Palestine. That's contradictory. That's impossible anywhere else. Think that someone is living in Serbia and at the same time he's refugee from Serbia. No, that can't happen. So, and this is not something individual. 1.5 million people are being taught that their real home is not in Gaza, not in Deir el-Balah, not in Khan Yunis, but in the state of Israel. Now, one surely asks himself, how can it be? What is so unique about the Palestinian refugees, which, you know, they have to have their own definition. They are the only people on earth who can reside in Palestine and still be refugees from Palestine. Now, what's the explanation? There is none, except for a political one. The political aspect of the Palestinian refugee problem is to inflate the number of refugees. Instead of 200,000, I can explain how I reached that number. There are currently, according to UNRWA, almost 6 million refugees. Now you understand, given demographics and given the population, both of Israel and of the Palestinians, that such a number, 6 million refugees, and their demand to return, what they call to return into the territory of Israel, makes the Palestinian-Israeli conflict unsolvable. So what we see here is a United Nations agency, right? An agency which was supposedly created to resettle refugees, to further the cause of peace on earth and certainly in the Middle East, which is doing exactly the opposite, is designating purposefully a huge number of people without any explanation, without any reason as refugees, thus making the conflict unsolvable. So this is UNRWA in a nutshell. The same thing happens in Jenin, in Ramallah. I'll give you another example. There are more than 2 million refugees, Palestinian refugees, living in Jordan. Now, they're not only living in Jordan, but they have Jordanian citizenship. Now, again, if we used international standards, when someone acquires new citizenship, I mean, when a refugee all over the world, when a Bengali or a Pakistani refugee arrives to Sweden or to the UK, and he is given a new citizenship, at that moment, his refugee status ceases to exist. He's not a refugee anymore because he has a new citizenship. Not in the case of the Palestinians. Again, the only group on earth who has a separate definition and whose refugee status does not cease immediately upon acquiring a new citizenship is the Palestinians. Now, again, the question is why? Why doesn't the refugee status of the Palestinians in Jordan, again, more than 2 million, these are not individual cases, this is a group decision by UNRWA to continue granting refugee status to millions and millions of people. For what purpose? Is it for humanitarian purposes? No, it is for political purposes, for the Palestinians to be able to continue their 100-year-long war against Israel, to continue to dream about returning to Israel, and in fact, undoing the state of Israel. Now, this is a little bit about the background. What I think, or how I see the next few days unfolding. I think that UNRWA, as it declared, will have some kind of an investigation, an internal investigation. I assume that since the issue have become so public, they will have to take it more seriously than in the past. I just want to remind you that cases of people working for UNRWA and at the same time working for terrorist organization has begun in the 60s. In my book, together with Einat Wilf, The War of Return, we show that already in the 60s, senators in the United States saw that people were at the same time receiving salaries from UNRWA and from the PLO. And that continued along the 70s, the 80s. So there's nothing new here. Okay, but since this case now, have got more publicity than before, I assume that the investigation will have to be more serious. But I can almost assure you what the outcome will be, because again, we have the experience of the past. The Commissioner General of UNRWA will have a press conference and say, yes, this is terrible. We have seen that those 12 or even 15 rotten apples indeed participated in the massacre of the 7th of October. But we now fired them. We have stopped working with them. And for the sake of the 30,000 other people who work for UNRWA, and for the sake of the Palestinian people, we have to continue UNRWA. So that would be the line of defense or the reasoning. Yes, there are a few bad apples. We will get rid of them, but please give us back the money and we can all go back to normal. I think this would be a terrible mistake by the international community, by Israel, and by everybody who ever wants to see peace between Israelis and Palestinians, because UNRWA is a detrimental factor in the conflict. It's a detrimental factor in the history of the conflict. It makes peace and reconciliation between Jews and Arabs in this area impossible. It makes the Palestinians continue to believe that the international community is behind them in their dream of from the river to the sea. In fact, UNRWA is the embodiment of the chanting that we have now seen all around the West of from the river to the sea, because it sends the Palestinians exactly the opposite message than the one they should have received. Instead of telling the Palestinians that if they want to live next to Israel, the international community will help them, it sends the message that no matter what the Palestinians say, and no matter what they believe, and no matter what they say, the international community will continue spending billions of dollars and providing them with all kinds of services. Now, another issue I want to address, and this is specifically true to the Gaza Strip, is that the existence of UNRWA have made things much easier for Hamas. Imagine that UNRWA would not have been in place in Gaza. What does UNRWA do actually? It gives services such as education, such as health, right? That's exactly what a functioning government is usually doing. Now, all of this headache was actually spared from Hamas. Hamas doesn't have to, take care of education, to take care of health. They don't care about the population, about the civilian population. So they have 24 hours, 7 days a week, time to plan how to kill Jews, how to infiltrate the state of Israel. So what happened actually in the Gaza Strip is that the existence of UNRWA have made life so much easier for the perpetrators and the planners of all terror attacks. Now, we have seen that underneath Gaza, in the tunnels, there were really very good infrastructure. So it's not that the Palestinians are incapable of building their own economy, or that they're so miserable, or untalented. On the contrary, they have made, at least according to engineers and people who are, have some technical knowledge, they said that the infrastructure in Gaza, the tunnels of Gaza, are on a very high level. So the question is not about how much money or how much aid the international community should give Gaza, but about the priorities of the people who live in Gaza. So I don't think that we should continue and thinking in terms of, oh, these poor people in Gaza, we must help them. The question is not how much help you give Gaza, but the question is what they do with the help or their priorities. Unfortunately, for the last 100 years, the only one, the number one priority was to never accept the existence of the Jewish state, to never accept the notion of Jews sovereign in this part of the world. And as we saw, all means, every dollar, every ounce of milk, of powder, of whatever you can imagine, of flour, was always given and sent to this purpose. So I think if I want to conclude and open it to your questions, I think that the decision should be permanent, that UNRWA should be dismantled, and that number one top priority for the international community and Israel, and of course, moderate Arab countries, is to change the priorities of the population and the leadership of Gaza before anything else is done.
Okay, we're going to open up for questions. Would ever like to ask something, please raise your hand and then I'll call on you. I'd just like to ask you first, Dr. Schwartz, do you expect that many more nations will be joining with them in cutting funding to UNRWA? And could you really see a possibility that UNRWA would shut down? Is that a realistic expectation?
So to your first question, yes, I think that we see like a domino effect. There are already 10 countries, and some of them are, like Iceland and Sweden, where, usually they are countries who tend to be very supportive of UNRWA. And if Sweden has decided to suspend, and this is an important distinction. It's not a cessation of funding, it's just a suspension. This is an important distinction. But yes, to your question, I believe that we will see already now more than 50 or 60% of the funding has been suspended. So it's a significant portion. And to your second question, I think I can't be too optimistic, but I think that now, for the first time ever, because there has been such a huge impact and the level of atrocities of October 7th was such, you cannot hide it and you cannot ignore them. So I think that for the first time, there's a bigger, hope or a possibility that indeed UNRWA will be dismantled.
Okay, I see HJ, you have a question?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for doing this. I think a lot of people already know the inefficiency of the UNRWA for so many years, but it's like kind of isn't it like it's like a similar situation where we're having very difficulties of thinking about the day after the war, because there is really no partner for the two-state or whatever that the international community is pushing for. So in the same case, if you actually dismantle the UNRWA, who can actually support this Gaza people? Because right now the Gazan people are heavily relying on all the system itself. Right now is relying heavily on the UNRWA's funding. So isn't it? We do want to there's a lot of wish to kind of dismantle the UNRWA, but is it practically and realistically possible?
So let me give you two answers. First of all, what we now see in Gaza, the huge infrastructure, all the ammunition and the tunnels was built while UNRWA was there. So the fact that UNRWA is present in the Gaza Strip is not a guarantee that Hamas is not taking some of it or all of it to their own purposes. So the presence of UNRWA did not help in preventing October 7th. That's one. The second thing is that I think it's high time that the international community start treating the Palestinians as grown-ups. We have seen that they are capable. They are capable. Everybody who saw the infrastructure in Gaza understood that these people can build factories, can build schools, can build hospitals. So why do you still think that they need international help? They had everything they needed, but instead of building hospitals, they built tunnels. So I think that the notion that the Palestinians still need so much international aid, I think that should be put in question. I don't think that they need so much aid. And I'll tell you something more. Perhaps that if the international community stopped aiding through UNRWA, Hamas or anybody else, whatever the government, interim, whatever government will be, will actually have to start working for the population. You know, what UNRWA is actually doing is relieving Hamas of all the normal duties that the government has towards the population. So of course, somebody else is working for the hospitals, for the, you know, everything else. So Hamas can continue and just acquire ammunition. That's one thing. Now, if the international community, and by that I mean the United States, the European Union, Japan, whatever, every country which wants to send or to, you know, give money to the Palestinians, they can do it in a variety of ways without using a refugee agency. The main problem with UNRWA is that it maintains the refugee problem. It perpetuates the refugee problem. I'll give you an example. Let's say that tomorrow there's an earthquake in Haiti or a tsunami in Asia, somewhere, okay, in India or somewhere. And someone wants to aid or send immediate aid. They simply send aid, ad hoc aid, and that's it. They don't stay for 75 years. They don't designate the people they're refugees. So what I'm trying to say is that there's no reason to designate these people refugees, recognize them against all international standards, refugees, and give them, and you know, like the international stamp that they are indeed refugees, and one day they're going to return to the state of Israel. You have to understand that UNRWA is a part and parcel of the Palestinian narrative. Perhaps for viewers from outside the region, it seems like a humanitarian agency which is somehow giving aid. But for the Palestinians, it's the international guarantee that they were the ones who were kicked out in 1948 and that one day they are going to return to their houses. So you have to understand that there's a very strong political dimension. Now, if you want to continue sending aid, okay, that's every country's own decision, but not through a political agency. It must be neutral in the sense that there's no connection whatsoever, not to refugees, not to anything which is, you know, having to do with the Palestinian narrative. And that is something that you have to do. But I'm seriously questioning the proposition that they need so much help, given the fact that we have seen what they did with it.
Karen?
Hi, thank you. I want to ask you about the near future, because there are Israeli officials who say that UNRWA is now maybe the biggest partner of Israel for the humanitarian aid that's going into Gaza. So by dismantling them or weakening them, aren't we what we call shooting ourselves in the leg and dragging ourselves to do more, to take more responsibility for the population in Gaza? And on another issue, more practical, do you have any idea what was the information that was sent to UNRWA and to United States, and how long did it take them to get to this decision? Because both statements came kind of simultaneously on Friday afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, so for your first question, yes, that's indeed the Israeli perspective, and it's a wrong perspective, and we have seen that it did not help us. What you just said was the position of the Israeli defense establishment that UNRWA is the least worst alternative. But as I said, it did not prevent October 7th. And as we have seen, the Palestinians themselves are very capable. There is no need whatsoever for Israel to work with UNRWA. That's a myth. That's people are used to work with UNRWA just as they are used to, you know, having the sun rising in the east. That's just something which we are accustomed to, and we have to stop cooperating with UNRWA. I don't think that we should be Israel should be responsible for how the Palestinians, you know, provide the aid inside the Gaza Strip. You give whatever you want to give to the Rafah border crossing. That's it. You're not responsible from that moment on who is taking the you know, the trucks in. That's what the IDF says, right? The IDF says we want UNRWA trucks to take the food or whatever from Rafah border, right? And I'm saying that we are not responsible okay, we're giving the aid, we're providing or allowing the aid to enter the Gaza Strip. But from that moment on, we have no responsibility whatsoever of how it is distributed in the Gaza Strip. In any case, Hamas is the one who's doing it. We have seen people with rifles standing on the trucks of UNRWA, supposedly UNRWA. So that's a charade. We're just fooling ourselves. We're not shooting. Right now, we are shooting our own leg, as exactly as you said. Now, according to your second question, I don't know too much inside information, but since we know that those 12 people are apparently arrested not yesterday, right? So this is something which is in the process. I think that we can assume that there has been a process of deliberation of perhaps when and if to declassify this information. And the way was to deliver the information to UNRWA so that not Israel will pronounce it, but giving the information to UNRWA. And then UNRWA, I think, had no choice, because if UNRWA would not have said something, then Israel would have said something. So that was a preventive case by UNRWA to try to stop somehow the fallout and to contain the fiasco that was bound to happen if the IDF pronounced it itself.
Okay, if I just go back to the first, because Israel is would like to check everything that go inside the Gaza, especially nowadays. So if you put everything at Rafah, or there is a sea blockade, so you do narrow the amount of humanitarian aid that can go inside, and we have heard all the criticism, including in The Hague, only on Friday. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation. Because
no, I'm not saying that okay, if Israel wants to monitor what's entering the Gaza Strip, you do it outside of the Gaza Strip, right? You do it either on the Israeli side of Kerem Shalom or on the Egyptian side with some Israeli cooperation of Rafah border crossing. That's it. That you should continue doing. But from the moment that the delivery goes to the other side, to the Palestinian side, we don't care if UNRWA distributes it or somebody else. Why should
or
we?
who? Because eventually Hamas will enter the vacuum. Hamas will regain power.
But they're doing it anyway. That's exactly what they're doing. You see that there's a diffusion. You can't really distinguish between people who are Hamas and people who are UNRWA. We have seen that. Okay? It's the same group of people. Some people are teachers and members of Hamas, and sometimes people who are Hamas with rifles simply take over the trucks. So that's just something that we tell ourselves, that there's Hamas and there's UNRWA. No, it's not true. Hamas is controlling the entire area, or at least those areas which they are still in control. Certainly Rafah or Rafah and Khan Yunis. That's a delusion to believe that somebody can work inside the Gaza Strip not under the command and control of Hamas. They're certainly deciding who's going to get more food, more flour, more water, or whatever goes in. So what I'm saying is, keep on the monitoring outside the strip, so no ammunition goes in and nothing which can harm Israel. But from the moment that, and you don't need UNRWA for that, we do it alone. And from the moment that everything goes in the strip, why do we care how they distribute it? If it's really not weapon, let's say it's bread and milk and flour, okay, let's just say, or clothing. Why do we care if UNRWA distributes it or Hamas distributes it? It's the same anyway. Do you understand? By letting this charade continue, the costs that we are, let me tell you another thing. We hear, for example, UN personnel, the IDF killed UN personnel, or the IDF is attacking United Nations facilities. Now, when you hear this and you're in Belgium or in Sweden, you say to yourself, okay, my God, these Israelis are lunatic, right? They're killing the United Nations. The United Nations is neutral. They don't understand the reality on the ground in Gaza. In Gaza, all United Nations personnel are Palestinian. inside UNRWA schools and hospitals, you have rockets, you have tunnels, you have army infrastructure, okay? So we just have to stop with this charade. There's no reason for UNRWA to operate, okay? There are no refugees in Gaza. They don't need a refugees agency. You understand? It's like a bubble that was created like 75 years ago, and now we say that we have to distribute. I don't know if the Palestinians want to distribute. By the way, if the Americans want to distribute, if the Red Cross wants to distribute, someone go on, distribute it. Why do we need UNRWA? Why do we need a refugee agency which should have existed, ceases to exist decades ago? We don't need them.
Don't you fear don't you fear we might find ourselves distributing it eventually because there will be a chaos?
We're not in the strip. We're not in.
Now we are, but now we are.
No, not in. No, when you talk, no. We're in Rafah. We're not in Rafah.
No, we're not in Rafah.
We're not distributing. Listen, trucks are arriving at Rafah. That's it. That's our. I don't think it's an obligation, but that is something voluntary that we decided to do together with the pressure of the international community. Okay, whatever. Okay, you bring something to the doorstep of someone. That's it. From that moment on, he decides how much his older brother will get, how much his younger brother will get. That's it. I'm not responsible for that. That is not a reason. And you know what? Let me continue. Even for the day after, okay? You're now talking about some kind of a humanitarian ad hoc need for the real, very near future. But I hear that people say that we'll need UNRWA even in the day after. Why is that?
For the reconstruction.
Again, you cannot reconstruct anything with an agency which is flawed from the beginning. This is how we got to October 7th. There is a connection between the Palestinian worldview and how we got here and the entire structure of UNRWA Nakba refugees. That's not in a vacuum. What the United Nations Secretary General said was exactly right. It's an entire worldview, entire ecosystem which portrays the Palestinians as victims, as eternal victims of the Jews. And UNRWA is just that. So with UNRWA, we arrived to October 7th. Now we want to reconstruct the Gaza Strip again with UNRWA? We're going to get another October 7th. There's so many ways to reconstruct. Again, I'm giving you examples all over the world when towns, villages are destroyed in a tsunami or destroyed in Turkey. When you have earthquake, do you designate them as refugees? No, you send some kind of aid to reconstruct. That's it. You don't stay 75 years.
Okay, we have one more question that was given to me. Can you explain what the process would be to dismantle the UNRWA? Is it just simply to cut the funding, it will automatically dismantle? Or what would be the process of dismantling it from the Israeli side?
Very simple. No agency, no person, no institution can work without budget. No matter what the General Assembly says, the budget for UNRWA comes from those 10 or 20 or 30 Western countries, mainly the United States, the European Union, Sweden, Norway, Germany. In those 5 or 6 countries, I've already said something like 80% of UNRWA's budget. If these countries decide unilaterally, they are not bound by any kind, this is a voluntary contribution of those countries. If they decide that they stop funding UNRWA, UNRWA ceases to exist. Okay, so there's no way to continue pay salaries and continue everything, all operations. So it's a very simple, even though it's United Nations agency, the budget is not inside the United Nations budget. Every year, the Commissioner General of UNRWA has to raise funds for the next year. And if he doesn't raise the necessary funds, then he can't pay salary. So it's entirely, if you remember the former administration, the American administration by Donald Trump, simply decided to stop the funding. If all the countries stop funding UNRWA, there is no UNRWA. So that's a very short and simple answer.
Okay, barring any questions, I think we're going to wrap up. Dr. Adi Schwartz from Misgav, thank you so much for joining us. I will be sending everyone a recording. And as always, we welcome your reports and your articles. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.